good morning there,
Hey,
Mr. Justice.
good afternoon. How
Well,
are you today?
I am wonderfully well, and just wondering if there's going to be an EV in every driveway.
Not for a long time, let's hope.
Is that your hope, or is that
Well,
mine?
I think we're still a ways away from practicality on that.
I tend to agree to some extent. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So what are we talking today? We're talking affordable EVs,
yes.
and I'm supposed to be against the affordable EV.
Yeah, I,
I
yeah,
don't.
I don't get why you're taking that position, but
If
that's
you would
okay.
like to take that position, I'll be happy to let you take it.
Well,
Uh,
it seems
but
to me it would be easier for me to take that position since I'm somewhat against EVs to begin with. so so that the possibility exists that even if they were affordable, I would still be somewhat against them.
as John points out, affordable
Yes.
being a very loose term.
It is. But according to JD Power in an article that appeared in Automotive News this morning, which I shared with you, and that article really was dealing with um, ICE vehicles and electric vehicle parity, and that we're getting closer and closer, apparently every day. Um, I it could be by the end of this year or the beginning of next year, with all the governmental incentives and everything, that actually a lot of EVs will end up being cheaper if you qualified for all the incentives,
Yeah.
um, than a comparable ICE vehicle.
Well,
I
and
found that interesting.
yeah, I think that of course will depend on your tax situation since a lot of those are still rebates. I think 2024 is when you can start taking them at the dealership
Yeah,
as a discount. And that will be, if that stays, we'll see. Supposed to release some more information on that, I think today. The IRS is. So certainly once it becomes at the point of sale, a rebate,
hmm
that will help a lot. Whether we want that or not, I have questions about, and just follow my logic here, Ray.
okay.
We talk about battery technology and its improvement all the time
Yes.
and how fast it's going and, solid state or whatever other things that are the great hope of the industry to change range and time and speed and all that. So are we going to be flooding the market with used vehicles for those with less means to buy that are drastically inferior to the technology that's coming out? I mean, so are they going to be getting the equivalent of 9 miles to the gallon versus your 40 mile to the gallon vehicle? And so are we shoving, will we be shoving onto the used market sort of the substandard EVs for the poorer uh, to drive?
Well, isn't that what we always do?
To a degree, but I think the technology, I mean, we really are talking, maybe not nine, but I mean, we really are kind of talking 18 miles to the gallon versus
I
35 miles to the gallon. Kind of like there's a huge disparity in
I
what's
I
coming.
get I get that, but that doesn't mean that the vehicles that are around today aren't going to have some value in the future, even though they technology wise they will be far inferior to what's coming out. But it's not like these are throwaway cars at the prices
No,
that they are. So if that means it's the only way that more average folks can afford to get into these vehicles, then so be it. Now, the better question, I believe, is what happens if we really do end up with um, a large number of electric vehicles that are available in the 25 to $30,000 price range. Um, why is that going off? My phone and my computer are on silent, and But that's a story for another day. So, um,
We'll have to teach you how to turn on do not disturb instead of just silent.
okay. Um, you'll have to teach me that. So, but my point was going to be is if they're rebates as opposed to tax credits. And the
Yeah.
reason rebates are important is because a lot of your lower income people, that tax credit's not going to mean anything. The rebate has value. A tax credit has no value. It's just a talking point when somebody's trying to sell it. But if there's a huge influx of 25 to $30,000 new vehicles, EVs, um, I would think that is going to negatively impact the wholesale value of older, inferior EVs, so that those prices could end up, I don't know, in the teens. That would still be attractive to people that can't afford the ones in the 20s, the 30s.
That's a good point. Like if battery technology increases, say in the next 2 years so much that my battery on my vehicle is considered sort of antiquated and old,
Mhm.
my value falls to, you know, $14,000. Uh, it's still a really great car.
Yes.
So, and as we know, like the EVs don't have, it's not like at 100,000 miles, you're going to have all these problems on it.
You're not
It's,
gonna have it wouldn't anticipate, like, a poop ton of engine issues once an
yeah,
EV hits 100,000 miles like you would on a gas-powered car.
yeah. So, to that point, to your point there, that's a good point. Like it'll still be a really great car
Yes.
and, 12 to $14,000, that would be a lot more people who could afford that. And by that point, maybe the infrastructure will be there a little bit better, um, and it could be that could be a game changing. I think. Did
I
it say that half the people consider, or no, a third of the new car
no,
buyers are considering
I think it
EV?
was 2/3.
Oh, is it 2/3?
2/3 were saying, "I would consider it." Now, out of that 2/3, it's
Yeah,
probably like a third that would actually act on it,
yeah, I
and
think that's what it was. Yeah,
yes, but
2/3 are considering.
which is a huge
Would yeah.
increase in the amount of people that are saying they would consider it. Now, of course, all the advertising you see today and all the talk you hear today is about EVs and the future of EVs and what all the manufacturers are doing. So that's what people hear. And then suddenly it becomes, well, honey, do we want to get left behind? Perhaps we should consider it. So I think that's a big part of it.
Keeping
Whether or
up with the
not,
Joneses kind of
yes, yes,
concept,
and whether
yeah.
or not that consideration actually leads to, oh, yes, we must do it, I think that's a different story. But I understand why consideration is up. I understand why people are more curious today than they have been in the past. And I also understand why there's still trepidation
Yeah,
today. I mean, there is still that argument that I rely on a lot, and that is that we are still so far away from the necessary infrastructure to have mass adoption. Even though we see, I think sales in the first quarter of this year is like 8.7% of all vehicles sold in the United States in the first quarter of this year are EVs, which is almost double what it was this time last year. So we see exponentially the amount of EVs being purchased is just going up crazily. But if it goes up too crazily, there's the infrastructure issue that we're going to have.
yeah. And I get spoiled because I have the infrastructure
Well,
here. So
you're in
I'd like to see
California.
that. I'd like to see that everywhere, like
Yes.
when everywhere's like here, because I talk to people in ICE vehicles all the time when they talk to me about their EVs and these concepts, and I ask them if they worried about the infrastructure, and the most response I get is not really, because we're standing in the Target parking lot where there's a Electrify America, like 10 stations sitting there, And here that's sort of everywhere.
Yes.
So I think you're right. When infrastructure catches up everywhere else, uh, it's going to be, that worry will sort of fall away, and that'll be helpful. Um, Certainly, this starts off with homeowners, so it's not a concern as much there.
Yeah, but here's part of the sad reality in life at the moment. It's harder and harder to become a homeowner. Um,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
yeah, mortgage rates are up, even though housing prices are starting to decline in some places. It's still the prices of homes are so inflated that it's harder and harder for many people to be able to buy a home. So I think the infrastructure part of it has a lot more to do with, as we continue to see more apartment buildings, more condominiums, multi-housing units. Those are the areas. For instance, we've talked about it. I live in a condominium at the Jersey Shore. There is not a charging station here at our condominium. And honestly, I don't want to see one because I am sure there would be an additional assessment in our charges per unit if we had to install a charger for those who might drive electric vehicles here.
Depending
And
on the incentives in your state. Yeah.
well, yeah, but the incentives in the state aren't going to cover the entire costs of
They do in
installing.
California. They
Oh,
do in
yeah, but that's
California.
California. You
Yeah.
people are, it's like that's like you're in like a separate country. Okay. you
I know at times we say that we would like to be.
yeah,
I don't
well,
know that I agree in that.
but it's almost like you are. And so I mean there has to be some expense borne by a condo association. And if it is, I'm not sure I want to underwrite that. Um, it's bad enough I got to underwrite. They got to check my balcony to make sure my damn balcony isn't going to collapse. So, I don't know that I would want to underwrite installing electric charging stations in our parking lot here somewhere for the two or three owners that drive electric vehicles.
Yeah. So to Stuart's point here, most of the apartment complex chargers I've seen, they're not free.
Yeah.
So you have to, they're Electrify America or Charge Point or somebody. So you have to pay for that. And I do question, I have not looked into this. Maybe we'll look into this for Friday show with Justin on if there's a split with the complex on the charging fees. Because that could be a way that they can install at your condo and you don't get charged because they get paid by
Or
people charging.
or perhaps the condo would agree to um, rent
Yeah.
a certain amount of parking spaces to a charging company, and the charging company would pay the condo association rent. They would assume all the costs of installing the charging equipment, and then they would charge whatever they charge to the owners that are charging their vehicles. And so the association picks up a stream of income, and those residents that live in an association like this would have some place to charge their vehicles, and they would get charged for that privilege, knowing that what they're getting charged, some of it's coming back to them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the we still live in a capitalist society, so that would be the
Yeah.
key there. And and it's a good idea. I know when my landlord installed the one,
Yes.
um, there was not a pay. It's just metered separately. But most of the ones I've seen are paid, and I think that's a decent idea. And then you can get an adapter for your car. Anyone can park there. So that's you know if the complex is renting out the space or getting a percentage of the charge, or a combination of both, you know, that could be a great incentive to help the multifamily unit dwellers. Because as you said, the housing market is crazy.
Yes.
Here here in California, it's actually falling as people are leaving, but it's increasing in the east. So lowering in the west right now, increasing the east as people are
Yeah,
moving.
but the truth of the matter is California is not losing enough population
No,
that it matters.
no,
Okay, that it really, really matters. And when I used to live in Arizona, I don't want to suggest that there were times that Arizonans resented Californians because the Californians were selling their properties in California for a poop ton of money and then coming into Arizona and swooping up properties that seemed really cheap to the Californians but were what somewhat expensive to those of us who lived in Arizona, and it caused an inflationary period of time where housing prices skyrocketed in Arizona. So, but there's not enough
well,
people in
let
California that are
let me
selling property.
identify with you on this, Ray. That
Yes,
happens inside California. So I live in Sacramento,
yes,
and there is a lot of resentment from Sacramentans, from the Bay Area people who've done just that. They
exactly.
they bought a house for 500,000 20 years ago. They
Yes,
sell it for $6 million. They come to Sacramento. They buy their great big house and five others that they now rent out, which are no
yes,
longer on the market to buy. They sit back, collect the money, and they have driven up prices in Sacramento. There's a huge thing here. Just I mean, I'm an hour and a half away. So you
yeah.
just go an hour and a half away and you already see that kind of resentment. But yes, I've gone up to Oregon and seen the no Californian signs on real estate signs and things. I know what I talked to people who moved to Boise because that was really big for Californians for a
Uh huh.
while. And Idaho doesn't really want us. You know, so you sort of get into this. Oh, okay. Um, so I mean, but even within the state of California, that stuff happens, and those resentments sort of build and build and build. So I get that, and that's sort of this whole thing too of in the EV market, it charging infrastructure. Those who have houses don't have to worry about it, so how much do they care about the infrastructure being built out? The poorer, who traditionally sort of have less of a voice
Mm-hmm.
than the wealthier, they're the ones who need this, but how much of a voice do they get to say, hey, you need to bring this to my neighborhood?
So,
So,
so is in your mind, do you think we're better off leaving EVs to more well-heeled consumers and forgetting about the rest of us? Although I know the way you got into yours is because you bought a pre-owned one
yep.
at a very good price. And for those of us who can't afford a new one, that we will always be the ones to buy the less technologically updated pre-owned vehicles. Is that the way we're going to get into the EV market?
Yeah, I mean, again, certainly in the used market. I mean, I couldn't afford the new Tesla either, so I got the used one, which is fine for me. It's a great
Yeah.
vehicle, and I think that's certainly there. But as we get into more affordable, the Bolt is affordable, but you know, maybe not the best EV if you're doing a lot of driving, but certainly great for the average person who's driving, a max of 15,000 miles a year. The Bolt is great for that. But then you get into the opposite side of this, which is the environmental impact. As you get
Mhm.
cheaper and cheaper vehicles, well, they're not requiring less lithium, right? They're not requiring less minerals. So if you get this mass adoption without the battery technology improving first, without more efficiency, smaller batteries, or less whatever rare earth minerals, um, then are we causing more environmental impact by producing those than we are by just sticking with the high end and waiting for the technology to develop first?
Boy, it sounds like there's no real solution to this.
Uh, It's certainly not a black and white issue. It's certainly a lot of different aspects to it. And I bring up the environmental impact because that's how this all started in the first place, right?
Yes.
Primarily those who the Ed Begley Juniors of the world, who've been driving electric since the '80s when they were awful,
Yeah.
but cared about the environmental impact. So if that's why you're buying an EV, do you really want to see a lot of sub $25,000 EVs out there with the current technology that it's at now? I understand technology is changing every day, but right now we still have primarily lithium ion. So
Well, here's what I would say to that. With the $500 billion that major automobile manufacturers are have committed to investing in EVs moving forward, the idea of getting people into EVs for the green concept, saving the environment concept, is falling by the wayside. That will mean nothing at all to these manufacturers who are just going to be concerned with sales. So, yes, the concept of EVs initially was to save the planet. And I think moving forward, the concept of EVs will be to making profit and the hell with the planet. Um,
that's where we always seem to go as humans, right? We, we,
um,
we do sort of always seem to lean towards that direction. um,
I don't see how it goes any other way. It because you can't have mass adoption of it and mass production of it, um, and still have it achieve the concept of being able to save the planet. They're they no longer go together.
yeah, and I get that there's still a net positive in EVs overall as far as environmental impact, but I don't think it's as much as everyone sort of touted it was going to be in the first place, and this and that, and battery technology needs to improve dramatically, and we need to battery chemistry needs to change before we get there. So this concept of flooding the market with sub $25,000 or sub $30,000 EVs, that's a lot of rare earth minerals we're going to be reaping out of the environment to do that in the first place. And as you said, Tesla got into it, with environmental, and that, their head is still there. You
Yeah,
listen to any of their stuff, their head is still there. But let's be honest, GM, Ford, they don't care. That is not it has never been their business model. It's still not their business model. They don't care. They want to sell vehicles to people. That's what they're in the business for. That's what they care about. They're doing
yes,
EV because, I mean, honestly, maybe they don't have a choice. When the federal government says 2035 and that's it, I guess you sort of go, okay, well, we're going to have to figure out how to make the change.
sure.
You can look at Toyota, when they're sort of fighting it still because they don't have the mandates in Japan for it. So they're still kind of on the fighting it fence. So, where do we go with a sub 30,000 EV environmentally? Like, how does that? It seems like the environmental impact would be much greater than just sticking with the used ICE vehicles.
Eh, I don't know. I
I
mean,
mean,
listening to you, it seems as if the 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 hoped for gain in saving the planet will really end up being minimal once we get the mass adoption, and it might be so minimal that it really wasn't worth doing away with the fossil fueled ICE vehicles. I don't know. um I do know everybody reminds me that fossil fuels are a finite resource.
yeah, that's a big
eventually
one.
eventually and God knows when that eventually is, we would run out of them. So obviously at a certain point, you have to switch over to some other source to be able to power um, modes of transportation. Um, and I think I've said this on the show before. I am not 100% convinced that ultimately electric vehicles will be that choice for how we get around. That there might be some other technology or development 20 years from now, 50 years from now, and people will go and say to themselves, what were they thinking about when they switched over to electric vehicles?
I mean, that is certainly a possibility. And then we also get into this concept that along the lines of we're trying to get people to adopt mass transportation. So
Yes.
it's not, one car, one person sort of idea. So would a cheaper, say sub $20,000 EV hurt the adoption of mass transit? So we're not investing into that because we don't have as many riders, because we don't have I will use an example of here in Sacramento. We have a mass transit system that sucks. For a big city, like,
Yeah.
you cannot count on the buses almost at all. So if they come, they're not on time. And I do mean if they come.
Yeah.
Back when I was riding the buses, there were many times they just skipped a whole time slot and they never came. And it's like 45 minutes in between buses.
Wow.
Our light rail system is archaic and old. We're using old BART cars from the Bay Area
Hmm.
that are like 25 years old. And the reason for this is ridership keeps going down all the time. Ridership keeps going down. And so when we do affordable EVs, so people can do that, like, is ridership just going to go to nothing? And so we just stop investing in mass transit.
Should we at least define what we think when we're saying affordable? For me, I think affordability is sub $40,000. Okay. And I think the real affordability is in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. Uh, so when you hear me say affordable EVs, I'm thinking of the majority of them being between $20,000 and $30,000, and a smaller amount being between $30,000 and $40,000. Anything above $40,000 to me, whether it be an electric vehicle or an ICE vehicle, is not affordable. That's just me. Um,
Well,
so that's how I define it.
yeah, and I define it based on what we're talking about in general. So if I'm talking about whether it's going to affect mass transit adoption, I'm going to say that's going to be a sub $20,000 vehicle. But between 20 and 40,000, I don't think you're going to affect mass transit that much. But if you're just talking in general, yeah, I think sub 30 is my
Okay.
okay, sub
Okay.
30 is where you're going to be, where you'll see just this enormous explosion of EV ownership is sub 30. I think 30 to 40 is probably realistic. As what's the average price of a vehicle now, Ray?
It's close to 50 grand is the
Yeah,
average transaction price.
which is insane,
Yes.
by the way. We got to talk to Zach because I don't think we make enough to get a $50,000 car. Or maybe we're just too responsible and everyone
Yes.
is paying way too much of their income for a car. So I just won't do that. So, uh,
Do,
so
do,
I think it depends on how you're talking on what affordable is. But actually want to bring up another comment because Mark has a really good point when we're talking about used e-vehicles.
yes.
Used e-vehicles that there's a high chance a battery pack mismatch voltage will occur when the EV batteries hit the end of their life. So you're going to have to get a legacy battery pack. So you can't just like swap it out with a new battery, right? You're going to have to get a legacy battery because it has to match up, or some sort of converter, which would probably ruin your efficiency.
when's Interstate Battery, going to come up with batteries that I can pick up at AutoZone? Uh,
Well, I don't know how you're going to install those.
well, I won't they have people there that help you?
Oh, at AutoZone, yeah, because
Yeah, yeah,
that's the that's the guy you want working on your
yes, of
battery.
course.
Yep.
Um, the more we talk about it, the less desirable an EV continues to get for me. And as you know, you have expanded the way I look at EVs, but
But let's be
I
honest, like there are challenges to this, and the challenges grow as the EV market gets older and more
yes,
mature.
yes, and so yeah, what happened? What at least ICE cars for the most part, you can still get parts for most of them. You can, you can go to the scrap yard and you can get what you need and put it all back together. Um, but when it comes to ICE cars, I mean EVs, and you need batteries, you're really going to be limited as to what you can do and where you
Yeah,
can go. And um, I,
I do
I don't
think
know.
that's a legitimate concern going forward for the use as chemistry changes. So if we all switch to solid state, where are the used vehicles going to be getting their batteries from? You can't just go, hey, here's a new battery and plop it
Yeah,
in. Like maybe VinFast will, because that's sort of their model,
yeah,
right? Because you have to rent the battery separately. So maybe when they're designing new battery tech, they would design it with a thought of being backwards compatible for their vehicles. I don't know.
yes,
Like that's just a guess. I just say that's the only benefit to their model of renting your battery separately from your vehicle. Um, so, I mean, there are definitely legitimate concerns in this space. It's not all roses and sunshine and and go through, but it's not all negative either. That's what we talk about. I hear we have a question I think for you, Ray, because I
yeah,
believe we talked about some of this on your other show today with
yeah.
Zach.
What are your thoughts about fleet electrification over consumer vehicle electrification? Is one more important than the other? Um, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, and the reason I say that is because I haven't given it any real thought. But I would think, um, I will say this: if major fleets convert to EVs, and those who work for those companies and drive those EVs as part of their job, I believe that would probably make those people um, more liable to want to convert their own vehicle to an EV moving forward once they've spent quality time driving an EV on a daily basis. So I
Yeah,
think electrification of fleets would be important. I think electrification of mass transit would be important. Um, but I'm still not convinced that the infrastructure is there to the degree that we need it for there to be mass adoption at this point. Um, I I I think some of the growth that manufacturers are hoping to see should be tempered a little bit, because I think if the growth happens as quickly as some of these manufacturers think it will, that it could all backfire because the infrastructure is so far behind that it just might not be able to sustain what we see happening.
I have questions whether they could even keep up with that kind of growth. If Ford is losing $3 billion, GM says they're losing money on all their vehicles. Yeah, we have the most profitable vehicle on the planet is an EV,
Yeah,
by unit. And like, okay, so how are they doing it, but you guys aren't? How much are they really looking to invest, or are they just looking to it's one of these things. I feel like the legacy automakers are looking to take what they've been doing for the last 100 years and just make it electric, but do everything else exactly the same. It's like, well, that seems like a fool's errand to me. Like, you have to completely retool and rethink how you do things, how you design things, how you go forward. And if you can't figure that out with $3 billion loss and you're still chugging down the same road, like, how do you think you're going to survive that? Like, that doesn't even make sense to me. Like, so,
Um,
and I think, electrification of public transportation is important. And I know Justin is really bullish on this. Maybe we'll have to ask him on Friday, the of fleet electrification. Like that, I know he's discussed many times that should be the first step rather than, general consumer is, electrifying your fleet. And it makes sense if you have a local fleet of delivery vehicles. It
mhm.
totally makes sense to electrify those, save you a lot of money in the long run, a lot of maintenance cost, everything. So, that makes a lot of sense. And, I don't know that everyone's really, that sector is jumping on board as much.
Well, at one point, Amazon was. I would
Yeah.
imagine they're still committed to it.
No, they
Um,
are. Yeah. They just diversified.
yeah. Is FedEx, is UPS, have they committed to
I haven't heard
electrification?
anything about either of them. I know the USPS has,
Yeah,
and then, Amazon, but I mean, there's like half your fleet right there between those two companies.
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so, it's an interesting point to be in and watch go happen. I don't know that we agree that everybody's on board in the right direction yet. I
We
think it
shall see
seems,
what happens, but I will tell you this, I'm starting to get hungry.
yeah, yep. I was just looking at the time. We're about done here.
Yeah, you make
Um,
you make me work longer than Zach does. I don't get it.
I, well, that's why we come after the Ray and Zach show, not before.
Oh,
Because
okay.
if we came before, we'd have to cut off so you could get there in time.
Ah,
This way, I get to rob your time for free until you say enough, and then
I get it, but I'm getting hungry.
yeah, all right.
It's almost 1:30 here. I've got to make lunch. Yeah,
I agree. I'm
yeah.
hungry myself, so we'll go. We will be back on Friday with Justin for all the news of the week. There's definitely some news popping out
Oh,
this week,
I'm
uh,
sure.
so we'll be back to talk all about that, and we will see you all here on Friday.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Thank